The pre-show.
Windows 10. It's not time yet. Windows 10, Windows Holographic, and an 84-inch Microsoft Surface. Say what? A Galaxy S6 Edge with dual curves and an HTC M9 with a square camera? Get out of town. Hackers hacking the very fabric of the cellular network to listen in on your calls to grandma? Shut the front door. All that, plus your listener mail and BlackBerry's interesting worldview on episode 132 of the Pocketnow Weekly, the once-a-week podcast where we discuss news and opinion from the world of mobile technology, smartphones, tablets, smartwatches, and beyond. All that stuff you wished you had when you were a kid. From the studios of WERS in Boston, Massachusetts, I'm the man with the plaid, Michael Fisher. I'm joined today by the redoubtable Badger Simulator himself, Chief News Editor Stephen Schenk. Howdy do.
What it is, Michael.
It is, well, you know what it is. It is what it is, as my mother is fond of saying. And by Pocketnow's leading Android and web expert, and probably a lounge singer in another life, from Utah, Joe Levi. Welcome back.
Hello and welcome back. Tip your waitress.
Jules Wong is our podcast producer, slinging video and leveling audio across the board here at WERS. And the time is precisely 12:23 p.m. Good afternoon. Listeners, this episode of the Pocketnow Weekly is brought to you by lynda.com. Kickstart your new year and challenge yourself to learn something new with a free 10-day trial to lynda.com. It's used by millions of people around the world and has over 3,000 courses on everything from visual design to web dev to Photoshop. All their courses are taught by experts, and new ones are added to the site every week. So sign up for your free 10-day trial today, and you'll get access to view tutorials on iOS, Android, phones, and tablets, unlimited access to every course on lynda.com. That includes stuff like Mac OS X Yosemite tips and tricks, mixing a modern jazz track in GarageBand, what? Managing your time effectively, maybe even writing a proper podcast intro script, who knows? I told you, it's a wide spectrum. So I keep saying it, but it is important. Do something good for yourself in 2015 and help us out while helping yourself out. Sign out for a free 10-day trial, lynda.com, lynda.com/pocketnow. Don't forget the /pocketnow, that's important. And thanks for helping us out. Sounds like an 18-wheeler just drove by somebody's house.
Yeah, that's probably me.
Oh, that's all right, Stephen. It's time for you to talk anyway. Tell everyone how this podcast works and what to do if they're watching live and what to do if they're not.
Sure. If you've been watching the Pocketnow Weekly live broadcast for a while now, you know this. But for those of you who haven't, or just need a little reminder, we love to hear from you. That means contributing while we're live by using the Hangouts Q&A feature. Submit your questions. Other viewers will vote up their favorites, and we'll do our best to answer the most popular and relevant ones on the air. Of course, we always like to answer reader mail here on the show as well, so if we don't get to one of your questions, or you think of it after the fact, maybe when you're listening to the high-quality version of the podcast later, shoot us an email, and we will try to address it on a future show.
Nice. Very nice indeed. These are great instructions. This is a great plan. And we've got a great show lined up. I think we have, as a matter of fact, I think we have too much lined up for a 2-hour slot. And
let's just end it right now. I mean, we had a good start, high note here.
Right. Should we? Yeah, I agree. Let's quit while we're ahead. Okay. Shut it down, everybody.
Hold on, 2 hours. I only allocated 15 minutes for this.
Oh, excellent. Well, wonderful. Well, you will be halfway through Microsoft by the time you have to go. Let's ask Jules before we forget to break us into the news. Jules, sound the bell. Thank you very much, sir. We are coming into a bit of a rehash if you joined us for the Microsoft Roundtable. Microsoft had a huge event this week where it announced Windows 10 in a variety of flavors on a variety of different form factors, and also some crazy, earth-shatteringly futuristic stuff. So if you watched the Microsoft Roundtable, this is going to be a much shorter rehash. If you didn't, though, we still want to give you a pretty good picture of what happened in Redmond today, or this week, rather. So, Stephen, would you mind taking point on that, as you are the newsman?
Of course. We've already known that Windows 10 was coming for a while now. Microsoft made its first announcement back last fall. But today, or this week, we had a lot of progress where we started to see how this would actually look on phones, before it was a lot about PC and enterprise, so we got to see phones, how it's going to look on the Xbox One, because Windows 10 is going to be everywhere. If you have a Microsoft device that's relatively recent, it's going to be able to run Windows 10. Even not that recent. If you have a Windows 7 or even 8.1 computer, you're going to be able to upgrade to Windows 10 for free. Microsoft wants everyone on board for this bold new experiment of theirs. And they had a lot of interesting things to tell us. I mean, on the smartphone side, we didn't get to see the OS in a ton of depth, but what we got to see was pretty interesting. Changes to things like the start screen, settings menu, messaging. It's going to come with Office apps built in, and because connectivity between devices is a huge priority of Windows 10, we got to see how Office on the phone works with Office on your tablet or on your PC, yada, yada, yada. It was really a nice, I think it's a much more a broad look than we had before. It's not nearly as in-depth as we're hoping to see with Build coming up a little later in the spring. But it's a really great start, and we got news about the first preview for phones that's coming out next month. So users as part of Microsoft's Windows Insider program will be able to install kind of an early look of Windows 10 on their devices. Of course, it's not going to have every single feature under the sun, but if you want to get your foot in the door here, especially if you want to give feedback to Microsoft, help the company sort of shape the final Windows 10 as we end up getting it in the fall, this is how you contribute. So stay tuned for that.
I'm not a member of that program yet.
You're not?
No.
You like your devices to just be reliable and...
Yeah, I try and use them stock because every time I upgrade a device early, with like a dev preview or something like that, I sort of it's kind of a pain. It's like Joe, about this. It's about this like loading nightlies on and all that kind of stuff. Like, just not into that. And that's fun in and of itself. But it takes time, and I don't mind that. Like, it's fun as a hobbyist kind of thing. But what I really hate is then having a device that every time it does something a little bit wrong, I have to be like, okay, well, is this now because I'm running pre-release software, or is this inherent to the device? So for the longest time, I thought my Lumia 1020 freezing up in the middle of the night and not sounding my alarm clock was because I was running the dev preview. Turns out, no, that's a problem with some devices. So anyway, but it wasn't just phones, right, Stephen? Can continue with what else we saw at the Microsoft event.
Oh, sure. On the PC side, we saw a bunch of things. Of course, there's a new Spartan browser that's going to be coming to the PC, and we're going to have that on the phone. But maybe the most interesting thing on the PC, at least especially if you're already a Windows Phone user, is Cortana, Microsoft's voice assistant, making the transition to the desktop. And it's really cool. It's everything we loved about Cortana on the phone, but now with access to all this data we had on our computers. So it'll go through your files. It'll be able to easily find documents for you. It'll be able to, if you're looking at a web page, it's this great integration with the new browser. You're looking at a web page, and Microsoft used example of a restaurant here. It'll pull up all sorts of information, menus, reservations, nutrition, and stuff. It's the next logical extension of Cortana, and it's not groundbreaking in that we haven't seen other companies do voice assistants on computers before. Google certainly offered this with Now, but for Microsoft, this is key to keeping Cortana relevant, especially as Siri kind of is waning, and it's sort of becoming now a competition between Google and Microsoft to see who can deliver the most full-featured virtual assistant. Yes, Apple could easily come back anytime with tons of new Siri features and surprise the hell out of us. But for now, this evolution of Cortana it's something I think reason a lot of people will have to move forward to Windows 10. They don't get this on their computers.
A bit of a surprise to me because we all know that Apple is not the best at everything, despite public perception contrary sometimes. But we don't often see, at least I don't think. Maybe I'm being short-sighted here, but I don't often see Apple kind of be the trailblazer in a category and then fall behind. Like Siri. Yes, Siri existed before Apple bought it and re-implemented it, of course, but it wasn't really in the public consciousness to nearly the same degree. So you could say that Apple launched the modern virtual assistant trend. And now Siri is quite possibly the least impressive of the big three. Actually, in my view, entirely behind both Google Now and Cortana. And I think it's nice to see Microsoft have sort of a leg up in that regard.
Recently, sure, but if you look at the big picture of Apple, remember back '80s Apple with the Macintosh graphical UI. They had a huge head start on Windows, and then they sort of waned, and Microsoft.
I mean modern Apple. I don't mean
Okay.
Yeah, not the Xerox PARC days. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Stephen brings up a good point, and that's Apple does this. They ebb and they flow. One thing Cortana's got here that nobody else has, that I've seen at least, we have true multitasking abilities, at least on the desktop and laptop versions of Cortana, which is something we've never had. You can be writing a letter and typing on your keyboard and ask Cortana, hey, Cortana, double check this for me. While you're typing, without taking your hands off the keyboard, Cortana will look that up, present the information to you, and you can put it right there into your document, into your email, into your calendar, whatever. So it literally is a digital assistant functioning for you at the same time that you're doing your tasks. With Siri, with Google Now, or OK Google, whatever we're calling it. Sorry, I said the keyword, guys.
Everyone's device goes off.
That's cool. Cool.
It's an immersive experience where you are interacting with that and only that at the time. This lets it be a helper.
That's a good call.
Yeah, I get why that sounds cool, but does anyone else is worried about this as a security risk like I am? I do not keep microphones or cameras plugged into my computer when I'm not using them, just because if they're not there, no one can access the hardware.
Yeah, I get a little worried about that. This is why people call me a 14-year-old girl in the comments. By the way, I don't know. Like, people see the sticker on my MacBook Air webcam because I put it on there in a fit of paranoia like a number of months ago, and people always, I don't know why the insult of choice is 14-year-old girl. Are they the only ones putting stickers on their webcams? I don't know. But no, Stephen, you're not the only one who thinks about this stuff. I think about this stuff quite often, but I will say that I think, as with many things in our modern connected age, the convenience outweighs the concern.
Yeah.
I just tried Hey Cortana for the first time last night. I finally have a device that allows it to function. I have the Lumia 930, so it's sitting there on the Qi charger last night, and I'm like, well, I'm sorry for Windows Phone people, but I'll just say, Hey Cortana, and I had to say it a couple times because she's still a little slow, so I'm like, Hey Cortana, and like 4 seconds later, she's like, bloop, oh, how can I help you, Michael? And I just started Halo 4, which has this big subplot about Cortana being sick, and so I was sort of like, hey, are you feeling all right? But anyway, it's all right. We'll get into all of it later on. I'm derailing us a little bit, so Stephen, why don't you get us back on track? What after Cortana? Was it Spartan stuff?
Yeah, I kind of jumped ahead there. Spartan is Microsoft's new web browser. It's sort of like the evolution of Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer will continue to live on. Microsoft is going to deliver that alongside Spartan, especially for users who have enterprise things that rely on Internet Explorer working a certain way. Backwards compatibility more than anything. But this is clearly Microsoft's direction with web browsing going forward. And it's kind of compelling. I mean, I'm super picky when it comes to my browsers. And I got to say, this sounds, it's nice. The built-in reader, the offline mode. I don't think this was confirmed, but we heard something about it might even support Chrome plugins. That would be huge.
That would be massive. But what Joe is shaking his head. Joe, what's your opinion on that?
Okay, I'm a web developer by profession. That's what I do. I code, I maintain websites, and I live the terrible bane of having to make sure that web pages work cross-browser, cross-platform. So right now is a beautiful time for web developers because the majority of all web browsers out there are WebKit-based. You've got Safari on Mac and on iOS devices. You've got Chrome on Androids and desktop devices. You've got Opera. I mean, all of this stuff is WebKit-based stuff. So you write something and you just know it's going to look right. It's going to work right. Now that Microsoft is rebooting their web browser and getting away from their horrible rendering engine that they just keep stumbling over again and again with every new release of the browser, they're giving up on Internet Explorer as the primary browser. It's still going to be there for compatibility reasons. We can't kill it because they've
strangled themselves into a corner, or
well, they've strangled corporations so that you have to develop for it.
Yeah, you hear about people who are still running IE, I don't know, 6 or 7 because they developed these internal apps for this and they just can't move forward. They're locked in.
Yeah, and we're in that situation where I work in my day job. We just barely upgraded to IE9, and we were pushing so hard for IE11, and nope, can't do that because they won't support this, which our company.
So you don't see it as
to.
likely that this Chrome plugin implementation is going to work as advertised. You don't think that this is going to be...
Well, that's neither here nor there with the rendering, I don't think.
Yeah, it may or may not work as advertised, and that's great. That
Now,
Chrome plugins are designed to be web apps, and it's just adding another layer of confusion and whatnot. It's miserable. We'll get to BlackBerry in a minute and find out why that's not a good thing to do. And it's really the same thing. Microsoft had an opportunity here to say, you know what, we're going to join the bandwagon. We're going to be WebKit based, and then we're going to add these features on top of it, so that the web pages look the same and everything's great.
Now,
The problem
Microsoft
has. Before you go there, the problem Microsoft has is they try and interpret the web standards just like everybody else does, but they seem to have their own way of interpreting them. Instead of saying, well, I don't agree with the way that was interpreted, but everybody else did, so we'll go ahead and go along with that. Microsoft doesn't do that. They're the 800-pound gorilla, and they say, we're going to do it our own way, and everybody else be damned. And that has to stop.
That's just what I was going to ask, because even if you're using a different rendering engine, you're getting this content, HTML5, CSS, these are published standards. Shouldn't every browser that reads them display the content in the same way? I know it does not, but why is that?
In a perfect world, yes, it would, and it really comes down to interpretation of those standards. We're talking really geeky and above everybody's heads here.
Are we talking tiny differences, like a pixel to the left or the right, or does it really break websites, that they're just unusable?
No, it can be a cascading effect that rolls down and causes sites not to look or display at all like they're supposed to, so that that button that you need to submit your form may not be visible at all because of the box that you put it in is displayed differently on one browser than another one.
I was running into some issues like that on Internet Explorer a couple of weeks ago when I was doing some Windows Phone review of some sort, and people were challenging me in the comments to justify my ire toward Internet Explorer, and I, rightly so. And I had to kind of dig around for specific examples of websites that sort of didn't load as well in Internet Explorer. But something funny then happened. I started having similar problems in mobile Chrome because mobile Chrome seems to be following the desktop version into this strange mire of just kind of funky, non-responsive, buggy look and feel these days, where Chrome used to be the superstar for me. So I'm not convinced that there's. Yeah, so I don't know if anybody has a leg to stand on when they say that one browser's better than another, right?
What's not helping the situation any is that. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but Spartan is not out yet. Devs don't have access to it, and even with the next, the Windows 10 preview, the one that's coming out this week, if it's not already out by now, still no Spartan there, so you can't be getting ready for it yet.
Yeah, I haven't double-checked on that, but it's going to be better than Internet Explorer. I mean, they're not going to make the same mistakes they did there. Instead, they're going to
all new mistakes.
A bunch of new mistakes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, we're going to get into some more technical talk later on in the show concerning some other stuff, so let's move on to something maybe a little bit more accessible and certainly more exciting, maybe, depending on your perspective. And while we do that, I should inform Joe that his thumbnail is
awesome.
Locked in a continuous expression of surprise for about 10 minutes, and it's pretty funny. So just to let you know, Joe.
That's awesome.
Yeah, holograms may or may not be foisting themselves upon us in a user interface sense. And Stephen, it sounds like you're coming down on the more technical interpretation of that term. Are you saying Microsoft has not introduced the true holodeck to us? Please explain yourself.
Sadly, no. What we're talking about here is Windows Holographic and HoloLens, which, despite what the introductory video might make you think, is not just a system for designing motorcycles.
And toy rockets. Don't forget toy rockets.
Right. And quadcopters. Yes. Yeah, Microsoft is really embracing this new virtual reality trend that's sort of been picking up steam for the past a little more than a year now. We've seen companies like Samsung and clearly Oculus get interested in this, but Microsoft wants to take things one step further with a fully self-contained head-mounted unit, the HoloLens. This has your computer, motion trackers, of course, the display, all built into this to deliver an augmented reality experience that, for now at least, seems to be second to none. Use cases range from gaming to scientific research to just design, of course, what we saw in all these videos. And Microsoft has working prototypes that people at the event got to try out. We don't quite know exactly when a commercial model might be available. Specs are a closely guarded secret. We've heard a little bit about some of the sensors involved, and of course just reports from people who have got to see this thing. Of course, it's loaded with cameras, infrared, maybe ultrasound I heard mentioned. So it's a really feature-packed piece of kit. And it's probably going to be a little expensive, but Microsoft claims it will still be affordable both for enterprise and consumer usage. But my God, who doesn't want to be trying this out right now? Forget Oculus Rift. This is what I want on my head.
So what's the principal difference, Stephen? We have a couple of things in the Q&A at least addressing this. This isn't Google Glass. This isn't Oculus Rift. This is something entirely different. But
Two
why
big
is
things.
that?
One is the self-contained nature of it. You're not tethered to a computer like you are with Oculus Rift. The other is that it's more in line with what we know now as augmented reality. This isn't replacing your vision of the world with a screen. You're not locked into the headset. Instead, it's overlaying images that you see in the real world with its display output. And it can vary the intensity of that such that you can see the real world around you and then maybe just one computer-generated image. Maybe it's a menu, maybe it's a 3D rendered thing that's sort of floating out there, and it will look like it's part of the real 3D space around you. Or it can just completely overlay what you're seeing in the real world, blotting out the actual reality past the HoloLens and just replace its own graphics there. That's like what we saw with this NASA example.
Do we know anything about the display technology, how it's actually projecting these images onto the screen, or what the screen is even? I mean, is it glass? Do we know any of these technical questions?
So it's just maybe out there. I have not heard.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything like that. Now, the thing that really sets this apart from anything that I think we've seen before, at least I've seen before, most of the time you're talking about interacting with your environment. That's what VR is all about, is interacting with your environment. If what we saw in the demo, which is playing right now, is really what we're going to get, you'll have an icon sitting next to your bookshelf. You'll have an icon sitting next to your stereo. You'll have
not a Lumia
to-do
icon
list right on your fridge. Yeah, it's there. It's part
It'll
of the
be
environment.
seamless. Yeah.
Completely seamless. And how they're going to handle lag with that, I don't know, to keep it there and not, floating around, but pinned to that surface. Who knows if they'll get that right, but the concept there is amazing. You want to play your music, instead of going over to your stereo and finding a disc and popping it in there, you can just interact with that icon and add something from the library and immediately play that back on your stereo right there because it's contextually aware that that's your stereo. You want to add your calendar? Great. It's right up there on your fridge where everybody can see the calendar. It's stuff that we've been thinking about doing in the physical world that now Microsoft is applying to the virtual world, and if they can pull it off, this thing looks sweet.
I want to backtrack for a second there. I was talking about the major ways this differs from the existing system that we've seen. Input is a huge one, because with this, you're not holding any controller, joypad. What was that company we looked at who had those little finger things for use with like a Google Cardboard?
Oh, I don't know, but
yeah, but
this the Next Generation episode where Data had all those things on his fingers and he's playing with his.
Yeah, there's no special gloves. This says cameras. It just sees your hands as they're out in front of you. You reach out and interact with these objects it's creating on its display like they're really there. There's no input. I mean, input system to learn gestures and all, but there's no controller to deal with. You don't have to carry anything extra around with you. It's just the headset. That's incredible.
Yes, it is. The self-contained nature of it is very, very appealing to me. I like that it's not a peripheral. But it's a self-contained piece of headgear. I think that's great, and that ameliorates some of my concerns initially when, they just presented this thing in that demo video as like, oh my God, this is going to be Windows holographic, and they didn't show the equipment first. So they just showed all these crazy holograms popping up in real life, and I was like, did they figure out?
I like earlier on in the event. We got to see, they were showing the pictures of stuff, and there's like a kid in the living room who had on some big visor, and there's something on the coffee table there. I assumed this was just some like, oh yeah, 10 years from now, we're going to do something like this. No. 30 minutes later, boom, there it is.
That's interesting. So you had the opposite thing. You were not let down. You were pleasantly surprised.
Mm-mm.
But anyway, I wasn't totally let down once I actually got to think about that. Obviously, this is blazing a trail for a new concept of VR. I just I'm always interested in the execution more so than the concepts, or not always, but I can't wait to see how this functions in the real world.
Functionally wise, this looks to be everything that I wish Google Glass had been. We saw these. I've never used Google Glass, but I've seen the videos. They have the little. You're looking up in the corner. You're walking down the street. Oh, you can pull up a map and see how to get to so and so. Granted, this is huge, and of course it will probably weigh, I don't know how much, but I imagine it'll be a lot less comfortable than glass just by nature of its size. But it's so much better. Instead of having a little thumbnail in the corner, you can have like an arrow fly out in front of you, and that will lead you. You can have like a dotted line on the street that you follow. It's so beyond what Google was doing that it's a little mind-blowing.
Because of the nature of its more advanced hardware, it needs to be bigger, and so it's not like glass. In that glass was for all its nerdy looks and for all the people getting punched in the face because of its camera or whatever. At least it was relatively stylish. This is more like a piece of astronaut headgear.
Right. Glass committed itself to certain constraints and had to develop its technology around being eminently portable, comfortable to wear. Yeah. Microsoft is not so concerned about that. It's really not designed for wearing all around the house. This is something that's on your desk or in your living room. But.
Right, and that's fine. I just, you're always, if you're spoiled like me, you want it all in one, right? But I understand that's not what it's designed for, and that's fine. It's just, I don't know. I don't understand the animosity toward peripherals in general. Like, we hear this all the time with smartwatches, particularly from Tony, but also from a lot of commenters, where it's like, unless it's self-contained, I don't want to hear about it. If it has to attach to another device, then it fails. I'm like, why? Why not? Why is it not smart to offload a lot of the processing power to something bigger that can sit away while you do something on your head? Like, I don't understand why that's a crime somehow. But it is cool that it's self-contained. I'm not saying it's not. I don't see what the problem is with accessories.
I was just looking at some materials I think Wired might have released from their hands-on, talking about the heat situation here. And this thing has vents on the sides. It says it's not going to get your head hot. It's going to push the air up and away. And I'm just picturing, like, your hair getting blown out, these tufts of steam shooting out your ears.
Yeah, we haven't had to contend with a head-worn PC that has fans in it yet, right? Is that a first for this sucker? Because my Surface fans are going like crazy now. My MacBook Air fans are going nuts. I don't know if I've said this on the podcast before, but my MacBook Air that I beat to hell with Pocketnow tasks now has an area of permanent discoloration. Have I mentioned this? Where the output fans blow air onto the screen bezel, it's now like black in the lower left corner of the screen because I think some internal components have started to combust.
To cook.
Speaking of hot hardware, LOL, not really. Take us home on this Microsoft thing. Tell us why the Surface Hub is something anyone should care about.
If you're a business and you like teleconferencing and you want an all-in-one solution, why not get the Surface Hub?
Don't just get a dry erase board. No. Get something awesome.
We haven't heard a ton about the hardware. The details we have come to surface are pretty impressive, but it's much less interesting, I think, than the HoloLens. Not just because it's not something any of us as consumers will buy, and that it's probably going to be stupid expensive. It's that this is just an iterative development off of existing smart boards. It's got cameras, it's got some nice touch sensors, but it's still just a smart board. Yeah, I'm not blown away.
We talked about it a little bit on the roundtable, but I think I would have been a little bit more impressed if some of the features, like this reminds a lot of people of the first generation Surface that Microsoft was playing with, its concept design Microsoft was playing with back in the day. But on that, the Surface was a table, and you could drop a smartphone on the table, and the table would recognize it in a really cool way. All these like bubbles would head on over to it and surround it, and then it'd be like, okay, I'm connected to the phone now, and do you want me to take these files from the phone? And it was really cool. Now, I think that would be pretty powerful in this enterprise setting of, it's like, all right, turn on the Surface. Okay, I see all your devices. Now just, pair them. You can do that, but I want to see it done in a really intuitive way. They kept using the word intuitive in the presentation. I was like, I didn't really see too much evidence of intuitiveness aside from
I do
automatically
not
going
think
to
that word
whiteboard mode
means
when
what
you
you
pull the
think it
marker out.
means.
Yeah, it's like what is it? What did Satya Nadella keep saying? Seamless. I think he said seamless about 14 times. But all those complaints aside, this was a pretty impressive event. I think Microsoft, the common perception is that Microsoft sort of owned it. Though I have seen, and I want to ask for your guys' opinion, I have seen a difference of opinion in terms of what was the more impressive part of the Microsoft event. Was it the first half, where they talked about conventional, concrete stuff like Windows 10 and how they're going to build the next generation of their OS, or was it the second half where all of a sudden Microsoft became fanciful and futuristic and wow,
This is a
maybe this can
question?
change the world? It is a question because I've seen good arguments on either side. Gruber was talking to somebody about it on Twitter last night. I was like, oh, there is actually a camp that thinks that the first half was the better one for the company because
I mean,
it's
yeah,
more
for the
practical.
company, it's smart. This is where Microsoft should have started going with Windows when they first got into phones several years ago. But it's just not sexy. This is okay, connected devices, everything working together. That sounds great, dream come true. But there's no sizzle, you know?
Mm-hmm. Joe, what do you think?
Well, Microsoft has been pushing for a unified experience and unified apps for a long, long time. I remember back in '93, I believe, Apple had promised or had said that their direction was going to be such that Mac OS would eventually run on Intel hardware, and
Yeah,
you'd see
when
it
did
all
they
over
start
the
moving from
place.
68K to PowerPC?
Yeah, about that same time, I think.
Okay.
Um, so we've seen they took a different approach where they came out with a new OS, and everybody started writing apps for that OS, and now we're seeing those apps beginning to be integrated with the desktop operating system. Microsoft has approached things from the other way, and they've fumbled around with it, and it's been miserable, but they're almost there. These universal apps that they're talking about, where it's one application, reportedly one code base, and one similar user experience, obviously modified and optimized for the screen size. Uh, that's really the way it's going to go. And if Microsoft lands this, especially if they land it in the next couple of years, we're going to see a tremendous shift in who's running what, because now Microsoft solutions are going to be uh, very, very attractive to the enterprise, to students, to mom and dad, and eventually they're going to wrap us power users back into the fold as well. So be prepared for a major shift, a platform shift coming up.
Now,
And
I'm glad we have you on the podcast for this, Joe, because I have questions that I'm sure you'll be able to answer as a dev, because I get really nervous when we start talking about universal apps, because we're looking at hardware that's completely different architectures. We're talking x86, ARM in there. Can you realistically develop an app that's going to run as best as it possibly can on all of this hardware at once? You can't do low-level optimizations. This is all going to be high-level interpreted code, isn't it?
good
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. You're 100% correct. The difference there is our hardware is now so advanced, both on the RISC and the CISC side. RISC being what we carry in our phones and tablets, and CISC being what we have in our laptops and our desktop computers and our servers, primarily. Don't We're doing weird stuff with servers there, so just don't yell at me for that. Uh, but the way that we develop programs anymore, at least on the Microsoft side, is we have a programming environment, an IDE is what it's called, an integrated development environment, and that gives you tools and libraries and an interface that lets you develop code, but that code is then compiled into a common language and compiled down to the low-level stuff. So I may be writing something in C Sharp, and the guy next to me may be writing in Visual Basic, and the guy next to me in J Sharp or whatever, X++, and everything gets compiled down to a common language runtime and then run on the device. So you've got this in-between layer that's taking your code and turning it into something that is optimized for the platform that you're deploying it onto. Regardless of what language you're using or what platform you're writing it on, it targets it for that. There's overhead in that, and you can't get the low-level optimizations that you had before, but what you have is hardware that's powerful enough to make up for that.
This is like we no longer have to do crazy RAM optimizations because we can just throw gigabytes and gigabytes at it. It's coming the same way with processing here.
Do we have any data on whether that extra RAM in some of these really high-end Android devices is actually being used? Because we've seen 3 gigs of RAM, 4 gigs of RAM in some devices. That Asus Zenfone 2 is going to ship with 4 gigs of RAM in one of its configurations. So Joe, yeah, I mean that's really being utilized. It's not just being thrown on there and being touted as a spec to sell more smartphones.
Well, it's definitely being touted as a spec. Don't get me wrong. However, it is definitely being used. We've got this situation that I just described where our code is big, our apps are big. The resolutions that we have and the images that we have to be able to look at things and have them look pretty on the screen, they're big. They take up extra RAM, and we've got all this stuff that we want to run in the background, which is taking up all this extra RAM. The more RAM you have, the better it's going to run. So, we're going to see more and more RAM come out to help alleviate that and to make things run smoother. And then you're going to see developers say, hey, I've got all this RAM, I can do so much more with it. So they're going to write even bigger programs, and it's just this endless
just keep
cycle
on chasing our tail, yes.
What do you guys think is the most RAM-hungry Android app out there right now that's not like an industrial or just limited
it's got to be a browser, right?
Yeah,
I want to say Google Earth.
Oh, that too, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't remember the last time I ran Google Earth on my mobile device.
It kills your battery.
I should try that. Yeah.
It is.
So let's keep moving along here because we want to move out of Microsoft. We're going to have a lot of Microsoft reporting in the next few weeks and the next few months, indeed. And finally, I think Windows 10 on phones is slated for a late February, not release, but at least a late February preview. We'll start to get the early seeding of the incomplete builds out. So that's exciting to me. When they first said that, I don't know what was going on in my brain during the event, but they said late February. I was like, oh my God, next year? What's going on? And then I was like, oh, wait, no, that's next month, you dork. So I'm very excited about that. But we're going to be talking a lot about that, and hopefully we'll see at least some whispers of new hardware at MWC. I think MWC with Microsoft, at least with Nokia, it's historically been sort of a mid-range thing. It was like the Lumia.
I mean, it's not on the rundown here, but we did hear some Microsoft employee talking about late summer being the target for new flagship Lumia hardware.
Which is still too far away. I don't care how awesome the Lumia 930 is. I don't care how awesome the one I made for Windows is.
At least we're not talking fall, because that seemed like it might be in the cards last time, this rumor about
late summer might as well be early fall, though. If they say late summer, they're going to take it right till exactly right. And to me, if school is in, then it's fall, folks. I don't care how you define your seasons. And also, what was the other thing? Some good news in the Windows Phone camp before we leave Microsoft. The Lumia camera app is in Windows 10. In Windows 10, going to be the default shooter. So they're doing away with the traditional Windows Phone camera software, which is a good thing because the Lumia camera app is far superior, and the maps are being redone as well. Stephen, you touched on that earlier. But they're going to be powered by here, but with the interface, the superior interface of what used to be called Bing Maps. So instead of having two confusing map hubs on the same phone, you have one mapping app with driving directions. And if you set a destination that's like within a mile or something, it'll automatically default to walking directions. There's some smart stuff. So it's not all catch-up on Windows 10, I'm happy to report. And, maybe I'm just excited and giddy about my neon green Lumia 930 demo device that is giving me a nice modern look at Windows Phone.
I totally drive to places less than a mile away.
So before we leave Windows...
You're so svelte. How do you do it? Go ahead.
Windows 10 for desktops and tablets and whatnot should be available for the back-to-school time frame. They said later this summer. That's usually when Microsoft targets so that they can work with their partners to sell new computers that have Windows 10 built onto it.
That BTS period. Are they going to offer some BOGO-ho deals in that BTS, yo?
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, not that you need to buy a new computer to get Windows 10. If you have an 8.1 device, Windows 7 right now, for the first year Windows 10 is out, free upgrade. Don't delay, because probably
Yes.
by September 2016 you'll be paying $100, 200, who knows.
Yeah, Thu Win asks if we would upgrade all our Windows 7 PCs to 10 as soon as it comes out. I've never had a Windows 7 PC, so I am not able to
I am
say.
not. I might. I don't know. I don't want to jump the gun. Wait,
I'm running Windows 7 on my computer right now.
Hells
I
yeah.
uninstalled Windows 8 because it was terrible, and absolutely, as soon as I can get a stable version of 10, I'm running 10 on this Windows 7 box.
All right, there you go. Well, we've got 10 minutes left in the news block, so let's move on to some other big stuff from Google. This is a rumor we have heard before, but it's getting more traction now. And Stephen, tell us what it is and how we feel about its veracity.
Well, veracity, it seems pretty, there seems to be good confidence behind the sources here. What we're talking about is Google getting into the cellular service game. Pretty much ever since Google's been working with smartphones, there have been these recurring rumors that it might be interested in offering cellular service. Obviously, the company's never done anything like that to date, but Google is interested in a lot of things that aren't necessarily, you wouldn't expect to be up its alley, self-driving cars. And there's also a sort of precedence for the company being interested in wireless networks. It's been doing that, Loft or Loon, the thing with the hot air balloons.
Oh, yeah, Loon.
Loon, yeah, where it's using balloons to give
Loony, yeah.
long-range Wi-Fi, basically. But so we haven't been sure exactly how a Google cellular system might work. The latest rumors, at least the ones that came in last year, talked about maybe acting as an MVNO, or a virtual network. This is where a company leases data, leases space on someone else's network, so they don't have to directly invest in spectrum and infrastructure. They just buy time off these other guys. It's the easiest way to get into the cellular service game. And this week, new rumors came up saying that Google's been talking to both T-Mobile and Sprint about possibly using their networks for its service. We heard more rumors then confirming these, and specifically talking about the Sprint arrangement, which of the two seemed to have the strongest sourcing behind it. As for when this might happen, sometime later this year is possible for the Sprint one. It may be a little further out than that. But it's really hard to get too excited about this, because we just don't know so many of the details that are going to be really, really important. With cellular service, pricing and network quality are some of your big concerns. Of course, device availability. Network quality, we can infer from, we already know these are Sprint or T-Mobile, we know about their networks. Google's will presumably act in much the same way. That's not a guarantee, because just because an MVNO is operating on the same network as the big carrier that owns it doesn't mean they're going to have the same traffic priority. So then we may have to be able to wait to see if it's active to judge that. But I think pricing is going to be the big question here, because Google has a habit, at least in the past, of delivering smartphones, the Nexus models, that were more affordable than a lot of the competitors. Now, it might not be the case anymore with the Nexus 6, but I'm sure a lot of people heard this Google's going to be a cellular carrier story and started thinking, well, does this mean we're finally going to have really, really cheap, really, really high-speed service? Kind of like what Google's done with Google Fiber and broadband. I guess that's not really cheap, but it's ridiculously fast. So the idea of them, upping the ante here, I'm not sure that could be the case, because if as an MVNO, you're always going to be beholden to the network you're functioning under. So why would Sprint sell access to its network for less than it's charging? Well, obviously less wholesale, but why would it give Google a way to undercut its own profits? So there's a lot of questions there, and also as to how you could access this. There have been some suggestions that this might be tied to Nexus devices, and with Sprint being CDMA, that's even more troublesome, because you can't just take any GSM phone, and we're not to that point where LTE phones work everywhere yet. You can't just bring a phone to Sprint and expect it to work.
But I could see Sprint, aggressively pursuing this, because unless something has changed in the past few years that I don't know about, if they were to be providing spectrum for Google's MVNO effort, they would be able to count those subscribers that are on their network as Sprint subscribers in their financials. which, as they're continuing to struggle to maintain their third-place spot, I think they're probably very focused on keeping that number up. So that may be one reason they may be.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys remember
go
way
ahead.
back when we were hearing about the Google phone back before the T-Mobile G1 came out, when Android was a new purchase by Google?
That really ugly looking
I think I was worried about my SATs.
Hardware keyboard.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that long ago, guys. Criminy. Anyway, so we had rumors about Google getting into the cellular business and about a Google phone and whatnot back then. So rumors were going around. They were flying. We saw that those didn't come to fruition entirely. And, now we know where the Nexus program is and all kinds of fun stuff. We heard about Google Voice and where Google was going to take over and through your data connection be the single source of all your voice calls, and we saw that really hasn't happened yet, and it doesn't look like they want to go that direction.
Well, there is an aspect of that to these rumors, though. There's been this ongoing talk, both in the new ones and the ones from last summer, that part of this might be something like what Republic Wireless does, where a lot of the traffic, voice as well as data, is intentionally given priority for Wi-Fi networks, and that the cellular part's like a last case fallback when there's no Wi-Fi available.
Right, that dovetails into where I was going. You're fine. In fact, I think the fact that you said that underscores that this may be what we're going to see. The Nexus devices, particularly the 5 and 6, with emphasis on the 6, run on a lot of different carriers. Nexus 6 will run on Verizon, on Sprint, and on GSM networks because it's got all the radios that it needs cooked in. A lot of the other phones that we're seeing also have the same capability in the hardware, just not in the software to do that. So if Google is going this direction, they could set up an MVNO through Sprint and T-Mobile, let's say, and eventually maybe AT&T and Verizon, and then whatever signal suits you best for where you are, and that might be Wi-Fi. At that point, that's the network that you're going to go over, and now you're using the best network in that geography to carry out your call, to carry out your data, and whether that's pushing it off to to data rather than the GSM network, which dovetails into our Learn Something segment later on, that might end up being a very good thing, and it gives that evolutionary path where Google now partners with everybody and everybody wins. Various people who are in the sticks, for example, where Verizon is best, Verizon's going to get money from them even on people who are driving through on vacation. So it spreads out everybody's money more evenly and lets these providers excel at what they do best. Verizon with being out in the sticks and Sprint being wherever Sprint might be good, I don't know. And T-Mobile,
it's got to be somewhere.
Yeah,
every time we talk Sprint, Jules has a little sad face on because his 1M8 Harman Kardon edition is doing him just fine here in Boston. Thank you very much.
And in some places it's great, and others
Joe,
it's not.
The picture you're painting, Joe, just makes way too much sense to ever come to fruition. It's a wonderful utopian mission of communication. No, I love it though because it's how it would work if things made sense, right? But that's why I have hope for this. I think a lot of times the acronym MVNO can come up in the news, and I'm like, yes, a mobile virtual network operator who will promise me everything in the world for $35 a month, and then 2 days into my billing cycle, the carrier that they are working with throttles me because I'm a second-class subscriber as far as they're concerned. But it strikes me that Google wouldn't go through with this unless they were going to do it right. And you guys have rightly brought up the Nexus program. I think there are examples within that program of both missteps and successes. So it's not a guaranteed hit, just as it is with any product from any company. But I think if Google's taking this long to do it, assuming they're doing it at all, I have a feeling that they're going to have something compelling when they finally do take the wraps off it. And yes, I would definitely try it out. Just like I'd try out any MVNO with a compelling offering.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember that Google has a very, very tight integration with Sprint right now through the Google Voice service.
Right, they were the first to get MMS.
Indeed, yeah. And Jules just brings up Sprint's attitudes toward net neutrality as well, which if they're on the same page with that, then that could serve as an impetus to work together.
Yeah, they're definitely already working together, and I can see them continuing to work together to bold new areas that we haven't seen before.
And bold new areas are the areas we need to go to now because we have to move on. So, Stephen, tell us, we're going to follow this story, but Stephen, tell us what's next on the agenda.
Fake 1M9.
Oh, dear God.
No. We've been seeing a bunch of leaked pics this week from HTC hardware, some of it more believable than others. There's been 1M9 pics and renders and all these in the wild shots that I think are the real deal. They have this squircle of a camera on the back. It looks a lot like the 1M8. Slight change to the proc sensor up front. New hardware buttons on the side, moving the power down below volume and splitting the volume. That looks very real. Then there's these 1M9 Plus pics, which, my God, sometimes you can't prove something is a fake, but everything about this looks fake.
Why did... I mean, I understand why we ran these. You have to run them because everyone else is running them, but, like, the minute I saw that thing, I was like, oh, somebody upscaled a Nexus 5 camera module and clumsily draped it on top of an M8.
And then shoved a Note 4 button on the bottom of it.
Yo, it's a miserable. Like, it's the worst thing I've ever seen.
It looks bad.
Like someone was really bored on Reddit at 3 a.m. and decided to cook this up to see who they could F with.
None of this is to say that this M9 Plus isn't actually a phone that HTC is working on, because there's been this ongoing set of rumors that we're going to get the 1M9, 1M9 Plus, and an M9 Ace going regular, bigger, biggest. But I don't think we've seen real pics of those latter two yet.
Right. So let's talk about the one that we do think is accurate, the Squircle camera and all that kind of stuff. This looks like a straight-up rehash of the M8. And do we think? I've seen some editorials out. Maybe our friends at Android Authority ran one. Is it okay? Is that going to be acceptable to people for the third year in a row to have essentially a rehash of the same, albeit award-winning design?
You look at the 1M8. What was the problem? The duo camera. Replace that with a high-functioning, high-resolution single camera.
A lot of people, they had trouble. They had objections to the bezels being large, particularly on the bottom.
Bezels look thinner on this. Well, the edge
on the
bezels
sides. Yeah, but what about the I'm surprised there wasn't a gate appended to this, like Space Gate or Gap Gate or something like that. Like, it didn't bother me, and it has been demonstrated that there is equipment behind that bay. So I don't understand why it's such a big deal to people, but it is a legitimate complaint, and if this leak is accurate, then it hasn't been addressed. Do you think that that's going to be a really bad thing?
It's always a bad thing on the internet.
Everything's a bad thing on the internet. Sorry, I had a stronger finish to that sentence, but then Jules distracted me with a chat bubble mentioning Deflategate, which is a big deal here in Boston because apparently footballs air inside them. And
I was thinking deflate the compression codec. Like, what? Why is there a scandal about?
And we've gone full nerd. All right, we're going to be talking about these a lot in the next few weeks, so let's move on. The S6 announcement from Samsung has been rumored for March 2nd. Is that right?
Yeah, right before MWC gets started, to the surprise of absolutely no one.
Yeah, well, no, it was last year, right?
Was the Unpacked right after or before MWC last year?
I know that Anton
and they did the play and the dancing, or was that another?
No, that was the S4.
That was the S4. I loved that. Please do that again, Samsung.
Please don't. The Samsung, Anton and Jaime were in Barcelona. I was in New York. They had the Unpacked event. We were all covering it sort of simultaneously.
Because that was before the 1M8 was right after MWC. Or one, yeah.
I can't keep them in my head together, but at any rate, this is so. If this is true, as it looks like it is, this is going to make for a rather large MWC. Despite the fact that we heard that I think LG is not doing a G4 announcement again, to the surprise of absolutely no one. I don't understand what the purpose of that story was, but this is going to make it huge. I mean, all you need for a trade show is for Samsung to come in and do something, as we've seen at MWC and IFA both. And when it's their principal flagship, well...
I think it would have made a lot of sense for LG to bring the G4 to MWC. And I feel like it's been the past couple of years been trying to get its flagship launched earlier in the year to compete right alongside Samsung and HTC.
I
Because
don't
there was a
want them to
big
change
difference
it up.
between the G2 and the G3 with when they launched.
Yeah, but I like it that LG like fills that window. You know, we talked about this
I
I think
know.
2 weeks ago. Where
To have
it's
something coming all year round, every few months.
exactly right, and it, you know, it's the same thing when we plan this podcast. It's like, oh man, well everyone publishes on Tuesday because that's the iTunes day, but like, and then you know, Twit, some of the really big guys, they do Sunday night. But then there's a big hole on Friday, and that coincides with us liking to wrap up the week on Friday because there's always breaking news coming out. So I like the same thing in a handset release schedule. I don't like everyone to do it at once, and then suddenly, you know, June rolls around and we're all, man, I'm bored. There's no new hardware, you know, blah blah blah. It doesn't.
Let's go to the
cares. Nobody cares. Freaking the Samsung
Speaking of the
S6, yeah,
Yeah.
Edge double curve. What's going on? Double pull, double throw.
Yep. Been rumors going back to when we first started hearing about the S6 hardware that Samsung might embrace the Edge design it did with the Galaxy Note 4 and give us something like that. And one of them that we've heard more than once has been this notion that instead of just the curve on the one side that we have with the Note Edge, GS6 might do something different and give us a curve on both sides for you ambidextrous or lefty users out there. At first, it didn't make a lot of sense, or at least the way we were hearing it. It wasn't presented in a way that had me believing it very much, but it's sort of stuck around and coming from more people, such that it might actually have some legs to it at this point. And I think it makes sense. It'd probably be a more attractive phone than the Note Edge.
Yeah. Symmetry is appealing.
And, yeah, it is.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
what would you have to do? Like dual tickers? Like
Well,
an
yeah,
app tray on one side and a ticker on the
They've
other?
been saying functionally expect it to work just like the Note Edge does. Although, yeah, what are you going to do? Is it going to be repeating the same content on both sides? Will there be a difference between what shows up on which?
Split it up with multi-window, have 2 apps running in full screen and 2 tickers going at the same time, and we'll devote 15 minutes of the review to the most multitasking ever on a smartphone. That'll be great.
It's going to look like a website,
buttons,
like a
yeah.
GeoCities website from 1998 with like 20 little mix-match banners and blinking and.
Yeah, only flashing text is going to be allowed on the things. All right. Well, maybe we'll say that. Maybe we won't. All kinds of rumors flying around about the S6, but the phone that, of course, excites me the most in the rundown came immediately after last week's podcast, and I think it was probably forgotten because it was Saturday news or something. Sharp refusing to let that flip phone form factor die. God bless them.
Japan seems to really love these things. It really makes me wish I had, some connection to a smartphone retailer there. But every once in a while, and actually kind of frequently on a regular basis, we've been seeing companies deliver flip phones that are smartphones to the Japanese market. LG's done it, Samsung's done it, now Sharp's doing it yet again. And it's nice. This one has decent hardware. It's not, flagship model, but it's kind of mid-range specs, especially for what it is, though. I mean, for its size, it has some decent hardware, especially with the display. It's only 3.4 incher, and yet it's quarter HD. And a quarter HD sounds lousy when we're up in the 4-inch space. At 3.4 inches, quarter HD is not bad at all.
324 PPI.
324. Hot damn.
Yeah. Hey,
So,
Michael,
maybe we can talk to one of our vendors.
Trek?
Yeah, I remember the HTC Star Trek. That ran Windows Mobile 5 or 6. Yeah, I remember that thing. It was a beautiful little
awesome?
folder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm seeing here, but now in the Android sphere with I mean, come on, a 1.2 gigahertz quad-core Snapdragon 400. We've shown that even the 400 is a very, very capable processor.
Yeah.
And when you take into the, we'll loop around to this in listener mail later on. When you take into account the size of the screen and the number of pixels that is pushing, that's going to be a nice little phone.
Solid.
That's a good highlight here. It's not confirmed that it runs Android. Is that what you were saying, Steven?
Oh, yeah. They never actually said this in any of the press materials, but it showed up on this KDDI website, and I'm looking at the Japanese tech details, and I'm not seeing Android anywhere. All we really have is that, from the screenshots, there's that clear Google search bar that you only really get on Android looking like that. I'm 95% sure this runs. And just looking at the specs, too, you would not give a dumb phone this hardware.
No.
I guess it could run some super custom OS that made to look like Android, but Why?
ties in.
A little PSA. We'll figure it out. I'm going to talk to my sources in the retail space and see if they can get us any kind of folding Android phone. Because for real, I've been talking about this for years. I really want one. Just a PSA before we move on to the Joe Levi segment. This is from Sonu Raj, who is saying that Joe Belfiore and Gabe All, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, at Microsoft, are actively teasing right now on Twitter, Windows Insider, a new build of Windows 10, 9926 specifically.
This is what they told us we'd be getting this week.
Yep, and it's rolling out now. So if you don't follow those guys on Twitter, you should. It's at GABEAUL and at Joe Belfiore, spelled like you should know how it's spelled. So thanks a lot, Sonu Raj, for that tip. And sorry we were a little late getting to it, but we had a lot of news to get through. And now that we're through that news, Jules, take us into Learn Something.
I am smart.
So this is not a new segment. I thought this was a new segment when we started out the show today, but Jules rightly reminded me that we did this on episode 109 a little while back. So this is a segment, if you haven't heard it. Yep, we did, about BlackBerry. This is a segment from our resident Android expert and web authority, Yo Levi, chock full of information for you to apply directly to your forehead. On today's installment, a write-in suggestion from listener Brendan Pfeiffer. It's about security, and you better listen hard because someone else might be listening to you pretty hard. Joe Levi, tell us, are hackers using an SS7 vulnerability to spy on our phone calls? And actually, why don't you just start with telling us what the F SS7 is?
All right, so to answer your first question, yeah, they are. And we're not just talking NSA hackers now. We're talking people with a computer and an internet connection and a connection into one of these SS7 networks. I read this, and it is terrifying.
Now, Joe, is this terrifying?
It's not.
Is this world terrifying? Is this human terrifying, or is this Joe Levi terrifying? Because you and I have different standards for this sometimes.
If you're not terrified by the time I get done talking to you, it's only because I didn't do a good job explaining it.
Okay. All right. All right.
So what we're going to do in the next several minutes is at the recent Chaos Communication Congress, which is kind of like a hacker con. We had 3 talks that were all well longer than an hour each and went into some very, very technical and deep details. I obviously can't go into those details in the next several minutes, so we'll have a link in the show notes, I'm sure, on where you can go to watch some of these, and it's not cool. It's kind of scary. So to answer the next question, what is SS7? To distill that down, SS7 is the protocol that is used to route calls between cellular networks and both inside a cellular network and to other cellular networks, other providers and whatnot.
And landlines too, right?
And landlines, yeah, you have to have that connection. And now that we have the internet, they are connected to the internet as well. So if you want to, think of SS7 kind of like TCP/IP for phone calls on the GSM network. Okay. That's really kind of the best way to think of it. Obvious differences, of course. But to really get into it, we got to sit back and think about how cell phones work. You've got this device in your hand. You push some buttons, you send, and your phone goes out to the nearest tower and says, "Hi, this is who I am." It sends across your IMEI number, and it says, "I want to do this. I want to make this phone call. I want to send this text. I want to look up this internet page," whatever the case may be. The cell tower authenticates you, and then it routes that call. Now, once you've done that, you go outside, you get in your car, and you drive away. You're still connected to that tower until that signal is not strong enough anymore, and then it hands your call off to another tower. Now, generally speaking, that tower is inside your cellular network. It's a T-Mobile tower to T-Mobile, or Orange to Orange, or whatever the case may be. You have an encrypted phone call going on between your phone and that tower, and now it's got to pass that phone call off to an entirely different tower. Now, where this comes into play especially is when you leave one coverage area and go from, say, T-Mobile into an AT&T network, and you try and hand off that communication as well. That's where things get a little bit funky. And when you talk about crossing country lines, as is the case in Europe, in the United States, we drive state to state all the time. In Europe, you drive country to country all the time. So you're passing off this information to a different carrier in a different country, perhaps.
Right.
So it's all kinds of interesting. The way that this works has typically been through direct line connections. So you've got a cellular network of physical wires, not just wireless and whatnot, but it's a physical interconnect between even two carriers going from one country to another country. They route all the calls down through that cable and whatnot. So we all have kind of what SS7 is for and what it does at a high level understood here, guys?
Yes, it's a protocol for moving your communications. Yes.
Yes.
Across networks and across carrier.
Yes. Now, just like the early internet, security, well, you guys might know this, or might not know this. Security originally on the first internet, the one that the military used, was a bunch of Marines with machine guns that stood outside the computer room. So if you wanted to have access to the network, you had to show your credentials to get through that door, and if you didn't, then the Marines, well, they took care of it because they were the security.
Right.
Nowadays, we don't have that. If you want to log into the internet, you walk into your bedroom, you pick up your laptop, you pick up your phone, whatever. There are no more Marines there to ensure that you're secure.
It's a damn shame.
And the people on the other end are the same way. I know, we should have a Marine in our pocket all the time. That's a new segment we're going to bring out.
The Indian in the cupboard, U.S. Marine edition. Yeah. Go on.
There you go. So with the internet, we have added additional security protocols. We've got SSL, we've got TLS, we've got a whole bunch of other things that we do to secure our communications and make sure that what we're talking about, what we're doing online is secure. We're not doing a great job at it, but it's better than nothing at all. SS7, because it's been more of a closed protocol that's been on closed networks, hasn't kept up with the same type of securities that need to happen.
Because it's not open to the public to cross-check it and for crowdsourced security kind of thing?
Kind of, but it's been more of a closed network. It's
security through obscurity.
And security through limiting the number of people who can connect to it. So Orange can connect to it, this cellular internet, if you will, and T-Mobile can, and Deutsche Telekom over there, all this stuff. They can connect to it because they are players in the game, and they all trust each other. And they should, they're not going to do anything wrong.
Right.
But as soon as they start off-shelving that to other partners and we get smaller players in the game, now you can buy your way onto that network and do that over the public internet. You don't have to be one of the elite cellular providers. You can do it with your own equipment across the internet, and somebody who has a connection into their network in whatever country that may be can connect you straight in. So
to extend your earlier analogy, like if it would be as if the Marines, instead of guarding the individual access points, just guarded one big gymnasium-sized server farm and sort of were asleep at the switch a third of the time.
If even that, instead of Marines, now we're outsourcing it to TSA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a private thing. And anyway, where this gets kind of worrisome is what are some cool things that you can do with your cell phone? Just talking cell phones and phone calls now, not data. You can set this thing up on your phone to say, hey, I want to forward all of my calls to this number.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to have a cell phone at that point. You've said, I want to forward all my calls over to somewhere else, and then, ta-da, that other phone rings, right? It doesn't have to use your phone at all. It just uses a setting on the network. That's fabulous. Except now, because of holes in the SS7 protocol, which is over 3 decades old, it was never designed to be secure. Now you can have someone who is sitting in Las Vegas, connected to this network across the internet, send a forward request to say, I want to send all calls going to Michael Fisher to this computer in Russia, who then records that phone call and forwards it back to Michael Fisher's phone number and spoofs the incoming call to be the one that originally placed it. So with enough bandwidth and enough processing power, you could have someone nefarious or some government organization who can literally intercept every single voice call, every single text message that is sent, record them, and forward them on back to you, and you have no idea that it's happening. It just processes straight through. Kind of scary.
So, and what do they get access to in that case, Joe? Just as a refresher here, because some people may have forgotten what SS7 covers.
So SS7 is everything. That's all the communication that goes through GSM type phones. So that's your voice phone calls, that's your text messages, MMS, that's even data. Data packets can be rerouted similar to that. Data's a little bit more advanced than this. So the examples that we saw at Chaos Communication Congress were more about phone calls and texting. So let's switch gears just a little bit right there. You've got your phone, and here at Pocketnow we use two-factor authentication to get into our Pocketnow accounts to make sure that people can't brute force their way into our accounts, right?
Right.
Well, there are, 3 ways that we can secure that. We can either have the Google Authenticator running on a trusted device. We can have Google make a phone call and use a voice recording to tell us what the access number is, or we can have Google send a text message to us to unlock that, right? So now, all of that two-factor authentication, except for the Google Authenticator, the voice call, the text message, all of that goes through the cellular network can be intercepted, and that two-factor authentication now becomes just more obscurity. It's something that can now be hacked if somebody knows your phone number and knows that it's a cellular number.
Fascinating.
So they can listen to that and they can break it. Now, are they going to do it? That's an awful lot of work to do, and yeah, it is. But as soon as you set up a server farm to go out and do this, that's what they're going to do, and that's how they're going to make their money. They're going to take this and they're going to sell it to people who want to be able to break in and have access
to
that.
This is a bit scary to me, because I've been in public, and every time I connect to a public Wi-Fi hotspot, I'm like, oh god, this is just, there's like a new article on the danger of that every week. That's sort of well known. But for years, the cellular networks, at least in my mind, and maybe obviously I've been wrong on this, but the cellular networks have been these kind of impermeable hubs of secure communications, because no one really, at least to my knowledge, no one really knows how to intercept and decode CDMA signals terribly well. Am I wrong, Stephen?
Software-defined radio.
Oh, yeah, true enough. Right. So yeah,
so,
all right.
All of those that we've been talking about, you don't have to be in proximity of someone's cell phone to do any of these hacks.
That's
you don't
the scary
have to
bit.
have that software-defined radio. You can do it across the world. From a balloon that you get internet through or whatever, right?
A loon, even.
So, yeah. So that's scary. The last thing that you do have to have proximity for, that I think is kind of worrisome, and let me get the right term here. It has to do with your location, your physical location, who you are, and then by inference, who you're with, what area you're in. People can make all kinds of assumptions. If you're sitting out in front of a known drug house that you're waiting for a drug dealer, and you might just be sitting out there because your car broke down, you're changing a flat tire, but you're guilty by association, right? Because that's where you were at that particular time. This other vulnerability, if you will, there's no patch for. Everything that we've talked about now, for the most part, can be patched by firewall rules. I mean, literally something as simple as a rule to say, don't allow this from that, only from trusted partners, yada, 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 just like we do on the internet. A lot of carriers in Germany particularly, which is where these researchers are from, are doing that and have secured a lot of these holes, but most of them in the States and in other countries have not yet, so there's a lot of work to be done. This other thing is called an IMSI catcher, an IMSI catcher. And essentially what this is, it's a fake cell tower. And that can be run through, like Stephen was saying, a software-defined radio that's just a USB device with an antenna plugged into a laptop. And all it does is it sits out there. And as you are walking around or driving around in the world, your phone is asking any tower that responds back, hey, hi, are you there? Who are you? What's your signal strength? I may need to use you in a minute.
Right.
And the tower then responds back.
It's very similar to some of the Wi-Fi spoofing stuff that we were seeing.
Yeah, it's the same concepts exactly. But here, your phone's always on. I mean, it's a phone, for heaven's sake, that's what it does. So every place that you go, your phone, by design, is going out and asking all the towers that it can hear who they are, and the only way it can do that, the only way it can get a response back is by saying, hi, I'm Michael's phone, here's my IMEI, here's my identifier number, who are you, and what's your signal strength? And then
I thought they no longer sent IMEIs in the blind. Not to come down on minutia here, Joe, because we actually have a minute left. But I thought IMEIs were no longer sent in the blind specifically for this reason.
And IMEIs specifically, I use that term generically, not specifically.
Okay. Just identifying information. Yeah, because I know
it's
the CDMA, they don't send ESNs.
Yeah, and they're called MC capture, so it's really just your subscriber information. It's a unique identifier. And in the 2G field, you could do that a lot, and just where that catcher is, so you know that the person is within a certain distance from it based on their signal strength. Right. So now you can track people's locations. 3G MZ catchers are out there as well. We haven't fixed it with 3G capabilities yet, but there's really no way we can do it. To get a reply back, you have to say, this is my device ID, hi, and then get a reply back. 2G has more vulnerabilities, obviously, than 3G, and you can go into a lot more detail at Karsten Knoll's Mobile Self-Defense 31C3.
We're gonna be dropping a link to the initial presentation in the show notes as well. So, Joe, thank you for this.
That's the video to watch, and he's got some really, really cool stuff on it and what it does. This technology, this MZ catching, is what a lot of law enforcement is using right now. They are going out and just parking trucks and listening to who's going by, and then inferring guilt by association.
So this has been mentioned. Stephen has mentioned that he'd like to weigh in on some of this as well. And there is also a question in the Q&A that I want to hit right before he does that. This is a great question from Keegan Anderson. How does this SS7 issue affect the black phone, Joe?
The black phone is still a phone, so you're still going to have the MZ problems where they can track where you are. And if you are making a phone call from the phone, you're still going to have the SS7 vulnerabilities to intercept and forward the calls. If you're using the black phone the way that it was really intended to be used, where you're using a SIP-based phone call where it's going across the
encrypted version. Yeah,
that's end-to-end encrypted. Yeah, you're a lot safer there.
Okay.
One last thing that I have is Karsten Knoll has an app called Snoop Snitch, which is a root app, so you've got to have a rooted device, and only certain rooted devices, not the Nexus 6, unfortunately, can you run this on, and it essentially acts as a firewall for your phone to tell you when certain ones of these vulnerability conditions is being met, and kind of protects you from them. So it's a proof of concept. Info. He's published the source code.
So it's proof of concept. So you shouldn't rely on this if you really need secure communications. This is there's still a question here.
Black phone's the only way to go. Yeah,
right.
You got to go black phone if you're going to go anyway, and then only use their encrypted phone calls.
I promise everyone that was a real Q&A question, and this is not a commercial for the black phone. I promise you that.
No, but it goes back to what we were saying. The only thing that you can do to ensure your security is end-to-end encryption, your device to their device. Anything else it can't be guaranteed.
Or go live in the woods. Thank you, Joe. Stephen, did you have something specific you wanted to add to that before we get into your segment?
I had a few points here. Joe did address some of those at the end here. One thing, your phone calls have never been free from prying eyes. Yes, they're encrypted to the tower, but you're still exposing that to your cellular provider, to the government through Kaela has access to these networks. If certain parties want to listen to your calls, they always could. All we're talking about now is a criminal element as well. But if you were really interested in keeping your information private, you were doing end-to-end encryption. That's the only way you can guarantee that. Treating SMS as secure for two-factor authentication was never a wise idea.
Bad idea.
Yeah, this it's our fault for assuming it was secure. And this idea of this all is not really new vulnerabilities. This stuff like being able to forward your calls to someone else's number. This is stuff that existed years and years ago. Hackers in the 70s were doing this with something called a blue box, because back then the signaling systems were something called in-band. That is, the voice and everything was sent over the same wires as this data signal, instructing the networks where to send the call, how to route it, and all that. So it was very easy for people to take control of it. Things like SS7 we've been calling this unsecure. SS7 adds a very important security layer in that it separates the signaling from the voice traffic. So right there, just by segregating it, was an effort to keep it secure. Clearly it hadn't worked, but that was the intention there. Yada, yada, yada. Can't read my own handwriting.
It has the potential to work. This is not to say we need to give up on SS7. It's saying we need to make sure that the carriers apply the same types of things that we've learned by securing the internet to securing the cellular networks too.
Yeah, and really I think if people are interested in keeping their communications secure, we're going to see a rise of apps like the one we just mentioned. Unfortunately, there's that root requirement, and the reason it only works on certain phones is because we have to know how to talk to the phone's radio in a certain way to get this information. And radios are this... chipset. Yeah, radios are still this, despite as open as phones are getting, this awful lockdown quagmire mystery black box, and consumers really start demanding access to their radio hardware and software if they want to have full control over their device and want it to be as secure as they would like.
Good points, all. I really enjoyed that segment, Joe. Your research was excellent, and I think I got about 35% of it. So for me, that's pretty good. No, really, thank you very much for that, Joe. And readers, listeners, viewers, if you have more to add, please do so in the comments or write us, podcast@pocketnow.com, if you want, corrections, clarifications, rebuttals, or simply assents. We would love to hear them all. And Joe, thank you very much for teaching us something, and to you too, Stephen.
Yeah, and let's say again who originally wrote in with that. Let's drop his name because that was a really good one.
Oh, very good call. Sorry, I meant to do that. Brendan Pfeiffer with that email. We know you waited about 2 weeks to have that one read, but we wanted to have the time to put this together properly. So, guys, if you want something answered in an in-depth fashion and it's interesting to people who follow mobile, once again, podcast@pocketnow.com. Follow Brendan's example. Brendan, thank you one last time. Now we're going to move into a new segment, an old segment, a segment of some kind from our friend Stephen Shank.
This has or hasn't been around.
Maybe once or twice.
Schrodinger's cat of a segment.
We don't know. This segment is called Dial F for Fail.
Oh my God, John Chen! What are you doing, John Chen? Is someone in charge of controlling your communication with the media because they need to do a better job? This letter got out. My God! All right.
Let me set this up for you, Stephen. Let me tee it up, and then you can you can punt it into the hockey net. A segment from our top news wrangler about injustice, misdeeds, general foolishness within the mobile industry. Hey, BlackBerry CEO, he's got an interesting interpretation of the biggest internet debate of the century, and Stephen Shank has an opinion on that himself. Net neutrality ain't got bunk to do with apps, but could BlackBerry have a point? Stephen, tell us what's going on.
Sorry for getting ahead of myself there, Michael. I'm just this
not your fault. Jules was supposed to cue me when the music was
and angry and. As you are probably aware, especially if you're in the U.S., one of the big questions that's facing carriers at the moment is how to treat our data traffic. Carriers, broadband providers, anyone working on the internet. This issue of net neutrality, whether or not all the bits flying around in cyberspace should be equal to one another, or if certain types should get prioritization, if you're paying more, if they're content that needs real-time access. You don't want streaming video to be stuttering all the time. It's a quagmire again. It's a hot button topic, and the FCC is finally going to hopefully rule on this in a way that makes a lot of people happy. President Obama, to the surprise of many, spoke out in the fall in support of net neutrality and these wide-reaching changes that would reclassify both broadband and wireless services as Title II utilities, basically. This is to be regulated in ways that would make sure that everyone has access to the same level of service. There's no, it's like you don't get, everyone in the same municipality gets water out of their tap. If you pay more, you don't get, sparkling spring water. It's all the same water. That's not necessarily a bad thing. With things as important as internet is, as internet are, you want to be on a level playing field. This encourages innovation. It doesn't give existing rich companies with deep pockets advantage over smaller upstarts. That's neither here nor there, though. John Chen of BlackBerry decided to weigh in on this issue, as a lot of carriers, companies involved in this debate are. He has some things to say about the carrier aspect of this, and I'm not even going to get into them now, because whether you're on one side of the issue or the other, that's... John Chen thinks that net neutrality means something that no one else does. BlackBerry is a struggling platform. It's seen its user base dwindling in years. Right now, I don't know exactly what it's at, but the last figure that comes to mind is something like 3% of the market. It's chump change. And as a result, there's not a lot of attraction to work on BlackBerry for developers and content providers. John Chen does not like this, and with good reason. But he seems to think that in the same voice we're talking about net neutrality, it's also worth talking about why can't we force these people to make software and deliver their services to my system. He called out a couple examples. Netflix does not have a BlackBerry app. That's Netflix's decision. It only has apps out for the platforms that it sees value in creating and putting the time in developing, coding, releasing, updating the software for. Clearly, BlackBerry's user base is not large enough, or BlackBerry's user base and demographics don't reflect a large enough number of Netflix users. It decided not to pursue this app. John Chen would much rather prefer the government say, no, Netflix, you made an app for Android, you made an app for iOS, you have to make one for BlackBerry too. He also calls out Apple, saying, well, we released BlackBerry Messenger for iOS, so Apple should have to release iMessage for BlackBerry. Apple, who does not have iMessage for Android, for Windows Phone. Apple, who loves to have its own ecosystem, should for some reason be forced to make its services available to everyone just because these competitors exist. It's capital L lunacy. Where the hell would you even draw the line here? I guess BlackBerry, yeah, it's even with its 3% of the market being the size it is, it's still a player of some stature. But the way John Chen wants us to be, would we have to develop native apps for Sailfish, for Firefox? I guess HTML5 would also solve the problem with some other platforms, but Ubuntu. If there's still some people running Symbian out there, should we have to be developing apps for them as well? It's so missing the point of why developers, why service providers make the content available that they do, that it boggles my mind that someone one of his executives didn't say, what are you doing, man? You're going to make yourself look like an idiot out there. And rightfully, a lot of people are calling him out for this insanity. Now, when I posted this news yesterday, some of the commenters started giving support for John Chen's ideas. And I was at first immediately resistant to this, because this to me seems like such an obvious issue here that this is not even, his ideas aren't even worth considering here. But they start making the point that some of the apps we use on our phones kind of veer into this common interest territory that has analogies to Title II, to utilities. I think some of these connections may be a little over the top, but they're saying things like a banking app. We need to access our money in today's society. Like it or not, having a bank account is a requirement for a lot of people. So if you need to access this, why shouldn't there be rules making it such that everyone can access this in the same way, have the same quality of experience? And on first glance, that sort of makes sense. Apps that you will find yourself forced to use, not like Netflix, underline boldface there. Things like, maybe a voting app, if we ever get online voting working in the United States, which I think should be on track for like 2050 or something. If a presidential vote app comes out, should it be available on all platforms? Yeah, but the way you do that isn't through apps. We already have a universal, can be accessed on platforms anywhere. It's called the World Wide Web. There's no reason to demand that companies release banking apps, paying your electricity bill app, when you can just go to their websites and do it. Or failing that, you can call them on the phone and get information from your accounts. These things already exist, and suggesting that by giving more work to developers, and it's really just throwing a bone to these struggling platforms, making them look more viable than they are, it's not helping anyone but the companies or people like John Chen who are behind these companies that really want to be bigger players in the market than they are. All this is admission that BlackBerry and that platforms like it aren't attractive anymore. John Chen really wishes that wasn't the case, but you can't legislate interest in a platform. I don't know what else to say. Am I crazy or?
Amen to that.
You are not crazy, Stephen. That was well argued, and I actually hadn't been following this. I was looking forward to this segment so that I could learn about exactly whether I was misreading the headlines. But no, I mean, legitimately, John Chen is asking for a principle that does not apply to be applied because he shares my opinion about his platform. And my thing is this: I agree with the guy. I just finished reviewing the BlackBerry Classic. I really, really wanted that to have more native apps because Android apps run so terribly on it, or some Android apps run so terribly on it. I want that factor to be changed too. On my Windows Phone, my Chase Bank has just announced that they are no longer going to support the Windows Phone app because they don't have enough users. That sucks for me. I don't want to go to their website. I don't want to call them up. Screw you, Shank. But I am not going to sit here and say that some government body should be called in to mandate that if you're going to build an app for one, you got to build an app for all. That seems to me, even for I live in Boston. I'm a rather blue guy. That seems to me to be the worst kind of suggestion of some kind of government overreach. I think that would be miserable. Joe, what do you think? Sorry, Steve.
I'm stealing someone's words here, but another editorial I saw on this talked about Chen keeps calling this discrimination, how developers aren't releasing apps for his platform. You're damn right it's discrimination, because we constantly discriminate. We choose one phone over the other because we like it more. We're making choices. That's all that this is. And we're choosing not to use BlackBerry, and so developers are choosing not to release software for it. That's all it is. Sorry, Joe, go on.
Oh, no, I'm absolutely right there with you. I'm out in Utah, so I'm a little more red than Michael is blue, I think. But
maybe
we can both see common sense here. It's insanity. And where do we draw the line? Do developers now have to write their app for the Atari, for the PS4, for the TI, for my graphing calculator? Where do we draw the line? We obviously that's to the point of ridiculousness. But if we put the shoe on the other foot, should BlackBerry have to write an OS that runs on Nexus hardware? It's the same concept,
what's good for
right?
the goose?
Indeed,
exactly.
Sauce for the goose.
He just misunderstands that. I think your net neutrality example up front was a good one, and it's something that we're all standing behind. Even the Republicans in Congress are saying, hey, we need to do something here to make sure it's a level playing field. But remember, when we talk about level playing fields and people being equal, that doesn't mean that the finish line is the same for everybody. It means that the starting line is the same. And whatever you do on the race between the start and the finish is up to you. If you haven't practiced, if you haven't trained, you're not going to finish that marathon, maybe at all, or you're not going to finish in the number one position. I'm sorry, but everybody starts at the same starting line.
Well, everybody doesn't. Ideally, everybody would, but everybody doesn't. But
how does that apply
before we get into an extrapolation of this conversation into equality versus equalization versus whatever that third word is, we should move on. And what's that? Equality versus equity. That's what I was thinking. God, I love being in the same room as someone. It's so nice. Thank you, Jules. But yeah, no, Stephen, well argued. Joe, I think we may have the opportunity to have this conversation again because I doubt this is the last we'll hear of this matter.
But especially net neutrality. This turned into something that is absolutely not net neutrality at all. No way. And somebody got confused and thought it was, so we had to talk about both a little bit. We still have the underlying net neutrality discussion that is ongoing.
And is very important. And
yeah, absolutely.
Next week, universal healthcare and how it relates to YOLA. Stay tuned, everybody.
Exactly. The sailfish and your gallbladder.
So before we get any further down that rabbit hole, I'm going to ask Jules to sound the annunciator so we can start answering some of your listener mail. Thank you very much, sir. We have 3 pieces of mail as usual today, and as coincidence would have it, 3 hosts on the air, so maybe we each pick one of them. What do you guys think about that proposal? Do you find it equitable and very democratic?
No.
Very good. Very good.
I find it representative, yes.
I said no.
Yeah, I know. It didn't matter what you said, Stephen. I was just going to go ahead anyway. First one from Christopher Drummer. I'll go ahead and read this one. Sounds like Christopher Plummer, which would be really awesome if you wrote it. I believe, for the most part, we are all satisfied and perhaps unsurprised by the announcements of Windows 10. However, they did not announce any information about Windows 10 on wearables like watches. Do you guys think Microsoft will invest in wearables further, or wait to see how the market changes once Apple has released the Apple Watch? Good question, I think. And something I'm ashamed to say I didn't notice after the Windows 10. That should have been one of my first questions. Where's the wearable news? But there wasn't any. So do we think that there was no wearables news because it just was outside the scope of this event?
Yeah, I have a feeling Microsoft really wanted to put this idea out there that everything they're making is running Windows 10. Your old smartphone's going to run Windows 10. Your old computer's going to run Windows 10. Your new computer's going to run Windows 10. Your Xbox One is going to run Windows 10. I can't see a smartwatch running Windows 10. If Microsoft does come out with another smartwatch, it'll run something that works well with Windows 10. I can't imagine them putting full-blown Windows 10 on it, and that's why we didn't see it at this event.
It's going to be Vista.
Vista's going to. Joe, do you share Steven's opinion there?
Yeah, and there's a difference between Windows 10 and Windows 10. Just because Xbox is still Xbox, it's not Windows 10, but it's going to run apps that are Windows 10 universal apps down the road. Smartphones and ARM-based processors and whatnot, I don't think we're going to have a unified code base like a lot of people think we have. We're going to have code that will run across the board regardless of platform. So in that respect, yeah, I think we will have some Windows 10 wearables, but they're not going to be full-blown Windows 10. You're not going to be able to run all of the apps on them. You're going to do what a wearable's supposed to do, and they're just going to use the Windows 10 branding to slap that thing on there. Whether that's works with Windows 10 or powered by Windows 10, who knows? But we'll see more wearables from Microsoft and from others down the road. We don't have too much from Microsoft right now, so I just think that they're going to wait and see how that space evolves before they want to try and slap their brand new fancy shiny name brand onto a wearable that might not succeed, because they don't want to muddy that name brand with something that might fail.
Pretty logical interpretation and a smart strategy, if true. All I will say is that I don't want to hear about a new wearable from Microsoft until we have hardware better than the Band. Jules has very helpfully thrown up our Band hands-on, and man, it's just bringing back all kinds of memories I don't want. So thank you very much for the email, Christopher Drummer, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the future of Microsoft's platform is on wearables, because, well, because Hotwatch still hasn't sent me a damn watch, and that's the only other smartwatch that works on Windows phones, so some bitch sent me that thing. Listener mail number 2. Who wants to read it, Stephen or Joe?
I got it open here.
Cool. This isn't a question, it's an observation, but I think it's a good one.
Let's see, this is from Grant Butler, who writes in saying, one benefit of using 1080p rather than Quad HD and 4K is that it has less strain on the SoC. This obviously means better battery life when using the phone, but also less heat because it isn't pushing the chip quite so much. You'll get higher frame rates in games, and the phone won't have to be throttled as quickly. However, it also means that you can achieve higher frame rates. You also see when recording video, for example, 120 frames per second at 720p, 60 at 1080, 15 at 4K, something like that. This is due to what the chip can cope with, and the same goes for the refresh rate. Now, the new NVIDIA X1 SoC, just announced at CES, supports 1080p at 120 Hz. Grant says he personally thinks that higher refresh rates are more important than resolution at this point. Everything will feel more snappy and smoother, and it'll be a massive improvement for VR to our current 60 Hz multiple displays just aren't good enough. So what he's saying is that while 4K might be possible with current hardware, it's so powerful now that we can just, if we scale back our expectations on the output, we can get a lot more out of it. Because the same thing as driving 4K at 15 frames per second, 720p at a crazy 120. So why don't we just get the really high refresh, lower res trade-off?
Absolutely.
Yes, these things are true.
I decided to let the experts speak on that, but yeah, no. I like that. I like every time somebody writes in with an observation that is like, yeah, no, I mean, totally.
It's something that it's an extension of something that's been with computers forever. We have improvements in one thing, we have things that demand things, and they're constantly moving step by step up and up. You can get a current PC and run, I don't know what's that, like run Doom on it at 1 billion frames a second. That's awesome, but you kind of don't want to run a 25-year-old game. You want to run Far Cry 4 on this thing with all the bells and whistles turned on, so it's going to demand more out of the hardware. And as we have things that can do better, we expect better things from them. Now, I guess there's an argument to be made about the trade-off between resolution and refresh rate. Yeah, refresh rate is really important for low-lag things like VR. This is the reason why the Galaxy Note 4 has like a special high-res or high refresh rate mode that it can use with super low latency for the Gear VR. But that, I also think, is very limited appeal. Things like video that we're consuming on these devices are still largely in 30 frames per second. Some movies have been done in 60 frames a second. Peter Jackson's a big fan of it, but it still looks super weird to us. We're not used to seeing video like that. It seems too natural.
Yeah. It's so hard to quantify why that looks so bad, but it does look so bad. And like you can tell even when it's in the corner of your eye, and like if it's a hospital waiting room and they're showing some like British sitcom that's shot at what is it, like 48 or 60 FPS, and I'm just like,
Yeah, or they used to use 25 in England before the HD switchover.
PAL, okay. Well, at any rate, it just looks so. It's like a nightmare in a frame. I don't know what.
I mean, there are benefits. We're talking about gaming. I guess that makes sense to have something a really smooth, high refresh rate on there. But I mean, look at your smartphone right now. You're paging through the UI. Even if the display can update at 60 frames a second, how many frames are you seeing when all the icons of your apps scroll by? On a lot of phones, it's still a little jerky. It's not hitting every single one of those frames with new content. I know, Butter on Android endeavored to make this a lot better, and it helped, but
it helped.
We're not at a point now where we're squeezing everything we can out of the hardware such that a physically higher refresh rate would give us tangible benefits.
Yeah.
Two things.
Looking at refresh rates.
Wait. Taylor Martin, go ahead. Sorry, Joe.
How about Joe Levi? Go ahead.
No, you're the new segue.
You're the new Taylor.
That's why you're Taylor. You're Taylor. Right?
Someone's got to be Taylor.
I had a whole lung full of air with 2 segues back to back lined up, and you just torpedoed everything. Go ahead.
Well,
Joe.
I'll be quick, and then you can ruin mine. How about that?
All right.
So we've got refresh rates, which movies are traditionally 24 frames per second. TVs are different. High frame rates 48, and sometimes up above that. Most computer monitors back in the day were 60 frames per second, and at a 60 hertz, really, you can see that. It messes with the human brain, and you can get headaches from it. So 70, 75 hertz, that's ideal. If we could get up to 75 frames per second, we're not going to be able to differentiate things from reality. Anything beyond that, you could argue, but you're not seeing much advantage because the human eye tops out around somewhere above 60. 60 we can still generally see. So we've got realism in frame rates that we're talking about, and absolutely, as long as we're meeting that, the eye can't tell the difference at the frame rate, which I'd argue is 75, then at that point, that's when you want to start looking at trade-offs into pixel resolution. Once you've hit 75, then let's put all of our force behind getting more pixels crammed onto the screen. But until you're up at that point, yeah, absolutely. Grant's right. We're throwing out these 4K screens, and we're looking at 60 frames per second tops on on Android Lollipop, and even that we're not seeing because the OS and what we're doing can't even keep up with it. So I say let's keep the resolutions at 1080 and let's just start cranking up frame rates and saving all that power.
I understand that from an optimizing the experience for the user perspective, but we're never going to get progress if these companies aren't pushing the limits, doing something that reaches slightly too far and lets us down in certain areas. Then the second generation comes in, does things a little bit better. All the while there's someone else planning the next big thing. I think it is important that these phones shoot big and fail in certain ways just to keep progress moving.
Yeah, and right now we're doing that on the resolution side, and we're pushing big there. The other half of that is let's push on the frame rate side too, and
we've already gotten beyond where we need to be in resolution. We talk about this all the time, but resolution that doesn't need to be up at 2K or at Quad HD rather for us to.
Didn't we write articles? Who needs 720p on a smartphone?
Yeah, but that was totally different. You can totally see the difference between 720p and 1080.
What do you think we'll be saying 3 years from now? Man, Octo HD is... How do we live without this?
Larger palette. Anyway, we've been there a million times. Steven mentioned a second ago the Gear VR and its frame rate stuff, which reminds me of the Oculus Rift and all that kind of stuff, which reminds me of a Q&A that I inadvertently dismissed from Jose Cesares, which is as close as I can get to that pronunciation. Sorry, Jose, who asked, "Do you think the future of wearables is that wearables will evaporate? We will no longer have smartwatches because our headgear, our VR headgear, will just superimpose a holographic smartwatch on our wrist." And it's hilariously futuristic as that sounds. No, I don't think that's.
He has a point. It's not going to be on our wrist though. We're just going to see like floating
around
screens. Yeah,
but no. I mean, we saw what happened when we tried to put Google Glass on the populace. I mean, there were riots and stampedes.
We'll get there.
Yeah, eventually. It is weird though. That's a whole other conversation, and we'll have it when we start wearing it.
We're all going to be like that guy.
There's a Q&A from Thomas View who says, "Where's Grant's question?" Thomas, this is a good opportunity to say, listener mail doesn't have to be a question. If you have a compelling piece, it's like a newspaper. You can write into your local newspaper with all your crazy, stupid political opinions, and they'll print it as long as it's like formatted right and has a sensible argument. Grant had a good point.
If you're John Chang, just publish it yourself.
Yeah, true enough. That's the miracle of having your own blog, corporate or otherwise. Listener mail number 3 is from Michael McGrath, and I want Joe Levi to read it because his voice is the best.
Oh, should I drop it down? Hi, Pocketnow crew. I know you like the questions to the point, so I'll make mine short. I'm currently using a mid-2010 17-inch MacBook Pro. It's getting quite long in the tooth, and I was wondering if a Surface would suit my needs. I'm a high school student and mostly use it for casual presentations.
That's the best part.
I just need some help on this topic. I'd love to see this on the podcast, but keep up the great work, guys. Yours truly, Mike.
Careful what you wish for, Mike.
Oh my god, that's such a big laptop. 17 inches, I think, smaller or bigger than my monitor size on my desktop.
The first laptop I bought with my own money was 17 inches.
My god.
An HP ZD 6000 or 8000 or something. It was awesome. It's awesome. So yeah.
Size, 14-inch, 11-inch, what do you guys recommend just right off the bat?
What do you mean? 13, 14.
13, 14?
15.
11's a little small for me.
I use a 13, but I'm looking forward to upgrading to a 15-inch for video editing. But if I didn't do video editing, 13 would be fine.
16 by 9 on laptops.
Absolutely. Vertically oriented, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so this is an interesting question to me because the MacBook Pro and the Surface Pro 3 are like totally different beasts. You know? Not in terms of power. I mean, you can get either in multiple configurations, and I think each. Does the MacBook Pro is that powered by an i7? Anybody know off the top of his head? Because the Surface comes in i3, i5, and i7, and the MacBook Pro at least goes up to i5. I would be surprised if it didn't go up to i7. Jules is looking into it right now for us.
The generation of the chip matters very much, not just the I designation. Yeah.
Sure. Oh, well, that's a good point, too, and this is why I don't cover much in terms of desktops and stuff, but really it's just a user experience thing. It's a MacBook Pro, especially at 17 inches, is a cut and dry, like, PC, or it's not a PC, it's a Mac, but you know what I mean. It's a computer. Whereas the Surface Pro 3 is very much a crossover device.
Tablet, yeah.
Sometimes it's a tablet, sometimes it's a PC, and it actually does a pretty good job at either one. So the thing that makes this question a little easier to answer is I think that I mostly use it for casual presentations. To me, that says, well, big
like
screen
PowerPoint?
size. Yeah, like if that's the case, then big screen size, 17 inches, that would be a huge help.
Or are you hooking up to an external display? I can't tell if that's what we're
or
talking
a
about.
projector or something.
Right, and even if you're not, then the 12-inch screen of the Surface still isn't small, and the fact that it's a little more portable, you can hold it up and sort of pass it around. You know, that would be my thing. If it's portability you're looking for, obviously the Surface is a better call. I think they're equally capable machines in terms of software.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but if you're doing podcasting, if you're doing audio editing, video editing, stick with a Mac. It's got the apps that you need.
No.
And
What?
no,
It's
no,
madness.
that's why I said correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you're wrong.
Why do you think I'm wrong?
I don't know, because what can't you do on a PC?
Well, I can do everything that I could
I mean,
on
what-
a Mac. I just think it's easier and smoother.
What is a podcasting app? A sound recorder has been built into Windows since 3.1. That's all you need. You record the sound, you upload it. That's a podcast.
Exactly. And MS Paint for all of your graphics and
I was using MS Paint for all of my Pocketnow image editing up until about 16 months ago.
It was funny. I do most of my editing in Preview, actually. I don't even fire up Photoshop for most of that. I don't know what you guys were arguing about, but it sounded great. I was looking into this stuff. Only the 15-inch, the current MacBook Pro, it goes up to the i7. There is no 17-inch MacBook Pro currently offered. I knew there was something fishy about this. I just didn't.
well, this was 2010.
2010.
The 2010 version, exactly right. Yeah. So okay. So if the question then is between 15-inch and 12-inch, you know, it's like it's a question of whether you want a tablet first, a tablet that becomes a PC, or a PC that doesn't become a tablet. And by PC, of course, I mean Mac. And you know what I'm talking about. If you want a computer, I'd say get the MacBook Pro. If you're doing a lot of media stuff, MacBook Pro. If you but for a student, I've always associated the Surface Pro 3 with a student type lifestyle. And students, please write in. Tell me if I'm full of shit, because I might well be. All I can say is that if I was still in college, I would carry a Surface Pro 3 probably, just because it is so small and versatile in terms of it can be a tablet and a computer.
And
What, Steven?
don't throw out a Chromecast.
If I
as a
were still in
possibility.
college, I would learn how to use a subjunctive voice. I just say it.
Jules just threw me an old test from one of his classes. Do you know that this still happens, people? Like institutions of higher learning still do work on paper.
Like
It
from
looks like he
trees?
used some sort of implement to make ink marks on this, and it looks like he
It's a
got a good
stylus?
grade.
Stylus.
Congratulations! Yeah, it's an old-fashioned stylus.
Wow,
Anyway,
an analog stylus.
Yeah, that's the listener mail. Do you guys want to see if there's anything? I just did it again. I went from my Surface Pro 3 to my MacBook Air, and I just tried to touch the screen of the MacBook Air, and it's not responding for some reason.
Oh, there you go. There's your thing. Surface Pro.
Yeah, there you go. There's your answer, Surface Pro 3. That's what I would buy. Students,
Can't
write
you
in.
get like
Help
a-
them out.
Stick-on resistive touchscreen or something?
I don't even want to hear
No.
those words ever again
Don't ruin it.
from your mouth or anyone else. Welcome, Joe Levi. Where's the Pocketnow Power User Series? Question mark, exclamation point. Asks Ahmad Hassan. Joe Levi, consider yourself welcomed. There is no Power Series user series anymore, right?
We have done various seasons of those, and we've always had specific things that we had in mind that we wanted to accomplish for each particular season. We've wanted to use those more as a foundational season series, something that teaches kind of the in-depth stuff at a lower level to bring up the education of our reader base, so we could talk at higher levels in future articles. So we ended the latest season with what we wanted to accomplish, and we're glad that you enjoyed it quite a bit. We'll keep season 3 in mind going forward, but right now we don't have any plans.
Word up. Good, well answered, Joe, and I too am glad you're here for the record. Ever in Malpica in the Q&A, is Qualcomm 810 really overheating, or is it an excuse for Samsung to use their own CPU? What benefits, differences, and advantages between Qualcomm versus Samsung Exynos? Real quick, I know LG has upfront said they're not having any overheating issues with their Qualcomm 810 powered LG G Flex 2. We will find out. at the end of the month, beginning of next month when we get our review units in, so we will see about that. For my own experience, benefits and differences, advantages between Qualcomm and Exynos, I have seldom been happy with day-to-day performance of a TouchWiz-powered Samsung device on an Exynos processor. I have almost always been more impressed by the Qualcomm Silicon in that particular example. But this is a new generation. Who knows what they're going to do now? I'm just talking about where I've been, what I've done, places I've seen, and the people I've talked to.
I think that something important to consider when talking about overheating is what that means, because smartphones today with like a Snapdragon 800, 805, they get quite hot when you're using very powerful or demanding applications on them. In my mind, that's too hot, but is it within the specs the manufacturer dictated? That's a very different question here. Just because LG is saying that the G Flex 2 isn't overheating doesn't mean that it doesn't get very hot when it's in use. So
yeah, until the smoke wafting from the speakerphone grills has the smell of sweet sausage instead of just fried components, you're not overheating.
I'll take a different approach to that. Overheating to me is if you're doing physical damage to components, that's overheating. If you are hitting a thermal throttle or a thermal shutdown where the device says, hey, we're running too hot, I'm going to shut down until it cools down, which I've hit a couple times myself, that I would consider overheating as well. But if it's just running warm, come on, guys, these things are running at like gigaflops of fastness ratings.
This is why all smartphones should have fans. I'm just saying.
Exactly, 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I didn't mean to leave you hanging there. We were figuring out some stuff for the end of the show, which is rapidly approaching. Final question. Sorry, Jose, we answered one of yours before. I don't think Project Era is the future yet. No. Thomas.
Hey, whoa. There's a segue to an article that went up right before the podcast, and go read that because it has some interesting insights.
And while you're at pocketnow.com, BT dubs, feel free to check out my video on the Yotaphone, my review of the Yotaphone, and my review of the BlackBerry Classic, and the E-Ink video finally went up. The E-Ink
that's an awesome video.
Oh, thanks, man. That was a really fun trip. That was a fun tour of the factory. So if you want to know how E-Ink works, if you want to know how your Amazon Kindle works, your Yotaphone 2, your various smartwatches,
balls.
Go check it out. Yeah, little balls, little charged balls. That's all it takes, really.
Deflated balls.
LOL. With all the HTC One M9 leaks, final question from yesterday, do you think it was really the One M9's body? Or could it be a prototype? Possibly just the M9 internals inside an M8 body. Thomas Mihaljevic. Close as I could get.
I assume we're talking about the one that with the Squircle.
The legit one, the Squircle, yeah. I think anything is on the table at this point, but I can't remember a time when HTC has legit led us astray with a design and then surprised us with something that wasn't leaked. I feel like HTC has a really hard time keeping secrets, whether that's on purpose or not is another argument, but this looks very feasible.
Yeah, and this, I'm not going to speak anymore to whether or not even the Squircle one is real or not, but you do an overlay of that image with a One M8, it is not the exact same hardware. The positioning of like the prox sensor compared to the front-facing camera is slightly different. It's not just reusing the old hardware. It may look a lot like it, but it's something different.
Very good stuff.
It could be another device in the in the One family that's not an M8, M9.
Yeah.
Or just a prototype that's never going to be a commercial thing.
Or just a prototype.
But it's not the One M8.
Listen, there has been more information exchanged on this show than in several episodes put together. I think we've learned a lot. You and Joe, Stephen and Joe, both of you, have dumped a lot of info on us, and I want to thank you on behalf of our audience. Thank you for your work. And
the Crimson Force Field.
The Crimson Force Field! Man, did you make a Pac-Led joke on this show? That was awesome.
You make things go.
Can you help? All right, Jules is telling me to get the hell out of here. All right, listen, Joe, you and I are going to talk about Star Trek The Next Generation when we're done with this. I got to show you my tricorder, bro. It's awesome.
I've been seeing it. That's why I was dropping the references.
So freaking rad. My thing that I have to tell everybody about is that our transition track is called Radiation. It's a ringtone from old Android smartphones. I wish it was on new ones. Ali Spagnola did it. She's got millions of fans. You should be one of them. Visit her YouTube channel, youtube.com/AliSpags. Her website is alispagnola.com. We've linked both of them in the description below for your convenience. Listen, That's going to do it for this episode of the Pocketnow Weekly, produced by Jules Wong, working the sliders right now, and when he's not doing that, tweeting about mystery ladies and retweeting George Takei at Green.0. He also spins sweet songs at WERS.org. Also, be sure to find the hosts on the Twitter sphere. Joe is tweeting about firearms, phones, and Abraham Lincoln at Joe Levi, Joelevi. Stephen is reminding everyone just what a hologram is and isn't at Stephen Schenk, StephenSchencK, and I'm sharing pictures of my brand new tricorder. It's pretty awesome. At Captain 2 Phones, Captain the number 2 Phones. Pocketnow is also on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Google+, and it all comes together like a nice bundt cake at pocketnow.com. If you enjoy the podcast, please help us spread the word. Share it with your friends who love mobile tech, and also leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Xbox, wherever podcasts are heard. As always, we thank our hosts at WERS. We thank our sponsor at lynda.com/pocketnow, lynda.com/pocketnow. And most importantly, we thank you so much for listening and for watching. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back with more mobile tech talk in 7 days.